Asato ma satgamaya tamaso ma jyotirgamaya mrityo ma amritam gamaya abhirabhirma edhi rudrayate dakshinamukam te namam pahi nityam. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Lead us from the ever-changing to the unchanging. Lead us from darkness to light. Lead us from death to immortality. Light us through and through, and guide us evermore with thy loving presence. Peace, peace, peace. Good morning. It's nice to see all of you here today. And I'm sure it would be just as nice to see everyone who I'm not seeing. When this pandemic started and we closed the center down tight as a drum, my first reaction was, finally, monastic seclusion. And then it went on, and I was even more happy when everyone came back, you see. Holy places make holy people, and it's nice to have some kind of normalcy again and be able to appreciate it in a little different way. So the topic today is glimpses of Swami Ramakrishnananda. This is part of a series that we're doing on the monastic disciples of Sri Ramakrishna. The aim is to go to original sources in order to feel as much as possible what it was like to be in the immediate presence of these great souls. So, Kierkegaard is a Christian existentialist, but also a mystic, said with regard to his Christianity, one must become contemporaneous with Christ. Time and space must dissolve, and you must feel their immediate presence. So that's the purpose of this series. So far we've done Swamis Brahmananda, Vivekananda, Shivananda, Trigunatitananda, Adbhutananda, Akhandananda, and Saradananda. So, even while Swami Vivekananda was in the midst of his first visit to the West, he knew that more important work was waiting in India. When he returned to India, it was in the city of Madras that he first talked about his vision for India, his vision for the revitalization of India on a spiritual foundation, but every aspect of India. And some of the prominent citizens in Madras, now Madras is called Chennai now, but all the references that we're using for this talk, it was Madras. So when I say Madras, it means Chennai, but I'm not going to say Chennai. Some of the notable citizens asked him to send one of his brother disciples to live in Madras, to establish a monastery and a center from which the inspiring ideas of Swami Vivekananda for India could be implemented in the South. And in response, Vivekananda said, "I will send you one who is more orthodox than your most orthodox men of the South, and who at the same time is unique and unsurpassed in his worship of God, in his scriptural study, and in his meditation upon God." He was speaking of Swami Ramakrishnananda. South India has all along been the stronghold of Orthodox Hinduism. And in order to infuse new life into the ancient religion without breaking the continuity of that tradition, the monk sent to the south had to be a person of great intellectual attainment, of unflinching devotion to the fundamental ideals of Hinduism, and with deep reverence for the forms of worship and religious practices that had been developed over millennia and sanctified by the authority of a succession of great teachers. If you really want to reform, you have to understand what's there already very, very well. Swami Ramakrishnananda, or Shashi Maharaj, as he was familiarly known, had all these characteristics, and additionally, he had an overflowing kindness, abounding sympathy for everyone, and a childlike nature, which exhibited the inner purity of his soul. His life can be divided into 5 periods. His early life, from his birth in 1863 to 1883, when he first met Sri Ramakrishna with his cousin Sharat Chandra. From 1883 to 1886, which was the crucible of his spiritual training and discipleship with Sri Ramakrishna, and the most important part of his life. The third period is his stewardship of the first 2 monasteries of the Ramakrishna order, the Bharanagore and Alambazar monasteries, from 1886 to 1897. The fourth is his public work in South India, mainly in Madras, but it extended to other parts of South India, up to Bombay, over to Burma. Towards the end of that period, he was called all over the place to inspire people with this message. And then fifth, his last illness and final accident in Calcutta in 1911. The most eventful part of his life, at least in terms of the external events which we can note easily, was in South India. Shashi Bhushan Chakrabarti was born on the 13th of July, 1863, in Ichapur village in West Bengal, the eldest of 8 children. His father, Ishwar Chandra Chakrabarti, was the court pundit of the Raja of Poikpara in North Calcutta. Now it sounds very fancy, but with 10 people in the family, they didn't earn a lot of money. I'm jumping ahead, but it was their hope that their oldest child, their extremely brilliant son, would help with the financial condition of the family. He was a tantric sadhaka as well as a pundit. He would meditate at night, sometimes in the cremation ground. And when Swami Saradananda was writing the Great Master and he didn't feel he knew enough about Tantra, he took tantric training under Swami Ramakrishnananda's father. And at the end of that training, he could see the Divine Mother in all women. So he was a man of wonderful spiritual attributes. His mother, Bhubaneshwari Devi, was a guileless and devout woman who was so modest that she covered her face with a veil, even sometimes in front of her children. He was brought up in spiritual surroundings by his Orthodox Brahmin parents. Ishwar Chandra worshipped the family deities daily and did an elaborate Kali Puja once a year. He taught Shashi ritualistic worship, and during the festival of the Divine Mother, Shashi would perform the worship service, ritual, japa meditation, chanting for 24 hours at a stretch without leaving his seat. Amazing. After finishing his education at the village school, he was sent to Calcutta to get an English medium education, and he lived with his cousin, Sarat Chandra. He was a little older than Sarat. He passed his first examination and then entered Metropolitan College for his BA. His special subjects of interest were Sanskrit and English literature, mathematics, and philosophy. During their college days, both Shashi and Sharat were members of the Brahmo Samaj and influenced by the wonderful example and oratory of Keshab Chandra Sen, the leader of the Brahmo Samaj. And it was from him that they first heard about Sri Ramakrishna. In October of 1883, Sashi and Sarat, along with some of their friends, went to Dakshineswar. Sri Ramakrishna received them with a smile and began to talk with them about renunciation. He asked someone to bring down the Bible and read what Christ said about it. Sashi was older than the others, and the conversation was addressed to him. He was asked directly by Sri Ramakrishna, do you think God is with form or without form? And Sashi's answer, I'm not certain about the existence of God, so I'm not able to speak to your question. Such mathematical precision, you see. This was a gift he had for boiling things down to very simple, easily understood terms, and it stood him in great stead when he took up the public work. Speaking of his time with Ramakrishna later, he said, after that first meeting, I felt an irresistible attraction for Sri Ramakrishna. After I had listened to him, I had nothing more to say. I did not have to talk. Often I would go to him with my mind full of doubt, and I wanted him to clear those doubts away. But when I reached the temple, I was disappointed to find his room full of visitors and another conversation going on. He'd look at me at some point and say, oh, come in, sit down. Are you doing well? Go back to his topic of conversation, and then bring up exactly what I wanted to know about and clear it for me. So I didn't have to say anything. Although he was a brilliant student, and brilliant enough to get scholarship, his interest in the college curriculum was dwindling. His keen intellect, his robust physique, his steady character were beginning to center around the grand theme of God realization. He spoke of this time. Sometimes the master would awake at 4 a.m, and he would call his disciples saying, what are you doing here? Snoring? Did you come here to snore? Get up, sit on your mat, and meditate. Sometimes he'd wake us up at midnight, call us, make us spend the whole night singing and praising the name of God. These disciples that became the direct disciples, and then not all of them became monks, but they were at a young age and malleable. In their teens or early 20s, some were as young as 16. The master played with them as if they were little children, and he a child as well. One day they were discovered by a visitor near the Panchavati playing a game of leapfrog together. You can imagine. Sometimes Ramakrishna would put them in peals of laughter by his mimicry. Then again he would be grave and wake them long before dawn to make them sit in meditations on the mats on which they slept. So both aspects were there. It was hilarious and it was serious, and many of them said that in later life in spite of hard austerity, they couldn't get the joy that they got naturally in Ramakrishna's company when they were just having fun. So Sri Ramakrishna developed cancer, and in his service, Shashi was just head and shoulders above everyone else. His case was exceptional. He knew no rest. He didn't care for any spiritual practice other than serving his spiritual master, Sri Ramakrishna. Fortunately, he was endowed with a very strong body and a strong constitution, but more than that, there was a mind whose strength was incessantly sustained by his love and his devotion to his guru. He spoke of the master's passing. When Sri Ramakrishna gave up his body, I think it was the most blissful moment of his life. A thrill of joy ran through him. I myself saw it. I remember every incident of that last day. The master is Sri Ramakrishna, seemed very well and cheerful. In the afternoon, he talked for fully 2 hours to a gentleman who had come to put questions about yoga. A little after that, I ran some 7 miles to bring the doctor. When I reached the doctor's house, I found he was not there, but was told he was at a certain place another mile away. I ran there and met him on the way. The doctor said that he had an engagement and would not come. I dragged him away anyway, took him to the master. You see, this is a strong young man who knew his purpose. Sashi's greatest trial was at the cremation ground. Now the joy and bliss that the master had shed all over them came upon him all at once, and he sang the name of Sri Ramakrishna with triumphant praise. Then a sense of utter loneliness stole over this joy and made him the victim of deep grief. When the flames had made the ashes of the body, when the flames died out, amidst the silence, Sashi quietly gathered the relics, put them in an urn, and took them to the Kasipur garden house. For Swami Ramakrishnananda's time at the Bharanagore and Alambazar monasteries, we'll go to the reminiscences of Swami Virajananda. His pre-monastic name was Kali Krishna. He joined the order very early at the Bharanagore Mat, and much later became the president and spiritual leader of the Ramakrishna order. He was the second Swami of the second generation after the direct disciples to lead our spiritual organization. Now, Swami Ramakrishnananda got that name when they took formal monastic vows in January, I think, of 1887. And although Swami Vivekananda really wanted to have that name himself, he decided, and he was designated the leader of the disciples by Ramakrishna, even on his deathbed. He said, no, Sashi has earned this. And that was the name that was given to Sashi Chakrabarti, Swami Ramakrishnananda. But he took it upon himself to take care of the other monks who were just mad to realize God, and they would forget food and everything, and meditate all day and sing and study the scriptures, Well, he'd go to the market, he'd get food, he'd make sure it was cooked for him. He got a job part-time as a teacher one time in the afternoon when they were generally resting, so that he could have money to buy what was necessary for the monastery. He took care of those practical things in serving his brother disciples. But even more importantly, the physical remains of Sri Ramakrishna were there in that dilapidated building, and he made sure that they were properly respected and worshipped. This was his main occupation. And whereas everyone else left and went out traveling at one time or another to do austerities, he never left that post for 12 years. So this is Virajananda's account. How wonderful was the arati of Sashi Maharaj. Arati is the evening service where the lamp is lit and incense is burned. How wonderful was the arati of Sashi Maharaj. It was a sight for the gods. Enveloped within the smoke of burning incense and drowned in the music of drums and cymbals, he would wave the yak-tail fan towards the end of arati. Seized with divine fervor, he would repeat, Jai Gurudev, victory to the Guru, Sri Gurudev, with a thundering note of joyous exclamation. It was as if Shiva was dancing beside himself with ecstasy. Sashi would move about with rhythmic steps from one side of the room to the other. What a thrill of spiritual fervor, what a unique feeling of ecstatic love would surge through the hearts of those who, like me, saw this. Can only be imagined rather than described. The whole building vibrated, as it were, with a divine tremor. It wasn't a very sturdy building anyway, and Sashi Maharaj was a big man. So it vibrated probably in more than one way. The whole building vibrated, as it were, with a divine tremor. It appeared as if blood would rush out of the worshipper's face, which was fair, but resplendent with a heavenly glow. He looked like the very embodiment of the god of fire. The cry and dance knew no cessation. The hands of the drummer would get numb and refuse to work. The spectators would watch everything from the adjoining room and join with the repeated cry, Jai Gurudev, Sri Gurudev. They too would dance in rapture. Then all would bow down before the picture of Sri Ramakrishna and chant in unison from the Guru Gita. So this was not a special celebration. This was everyday devotions. How remarkable. In those days that Virajananda talks about, the cook was the only paid employee of the mott. And before that, there was no paid employee. Everything was done by the monks, and mostly by Sashi. He'd go to the Ganges to get the water, and there wasn't enough clothing for everyone, so he'd be dressed in a loincloth. And the servants from the rich man's houses would be there, and they just assume he was one of them and joke around. And, he never told them, I'm a university man, I'm a Brahmin, I've come from a different class of society. He was just serving his brother disciples and his master. Sashi Maharaj would himself do all the work of the shrine pertaining to puja and the service of the master. He would attend to the marketing, sweeping, cutting vegetables, cleaning the altar vessels, drawing water from the tank for washing hands and feet, trimming the lamps. All these things were done by him almost single-handedly, though others occasionally helped a little. When I joined, I used to assist him. After the offering, when all had finished their food, he would enter the shrine and fan the picture of the sleeping master, Sri Ramakrishna, with a big palm leaf fan till 4 o'clock during the hot season. He kept up this practice without a break even after the monastery was shifted to Alambazar. In this, too, I would relieve him as I could. The other members of the monastery used to devote a major portion of their time to jopam and meditation, scriptural study, and discussion, sometimes singing devotional songs, either alone or in chorus. In 1897, when Swami Vivekananda came back to the West, I was with Swami Premananda in Vrindavan, practicing austerities, and we quickly came down to Calcutta. Still, and he described Sashi Maharaj, with single-minded devotion and unflagging energy, he was still carrying on his self-appointed task, the worship of the Master and the service of his brothers. And he worked like a giant. He was always in a spiritual mood. What steadfastness, what absorption, what inebriation he felt in worship of the Lord is beyond conception of those who have not seen it. And he could not brook the least flaw or the slightest delay in the manner of this worship. Everything must be prompt and perfect. That was his demand. Well, prompt and perfect is a tough one. You can have it prompt or you can have it perfect, but prompt and perfect is tough. I used to work with all my heart and soul, putting forth my greatest effort. I would try to discharge all the duties of the shrine as best I could, and yet there was not a single day that I did not shed tears on account of his scolding. I would turn my face aside and weep so that he couldn't see me weeping. I would wipe away the tears on my cloth and not taking my hands from my duties. Peel the fruit, continue to peel the fruit. I tried to finish my tasks as quickly as possible, almost running here and there. But the pity was, I was a bit slow. Shashi Maharaj, on the other hand, was exceptionally quick. In a thrice he did all the work. He was great in all respects, and he knew how to scold. He also knew how to love. As soon as the offering was finished, he would take the nicest sweets and thrust them in my mouth with his own hand and say, "My child, eat, eat, my dear." So Vivekananda was staying with them at Alambazar Mat, world-famous Vivekananda, and he was holding classes at 9 in the morning on the Gita and the Upanishads, and sometimes question and answer classes. And these were primarily for the young monks, the brahmacharis and the young swamis, although his brother disciples also sat in on it. For the most part, I could not be there, as I was unable to finish my duties pertaining to the shrine. Swami's eyes, it did not escape Vivekananda's eyes. One day he interrupted himself during the class and said, "Where is Kali Krishna? Why doesn't he come to these classes? Go, get him." Immediately I went. At the sight of me, he went into a fury and in an angry mood said, "Why don't you come? What's wrong with you? What are you doing? What are you doing? Cutting the tips of soaked gram one at a time? Call Sashi." When Sashi came, Swamiji got even more furious. "What's the matter, Sashi? Have these boys who've joined, leaving their hearth and home, come here only to dress the tips of oats that you want for your master? This can't be tolerated. All will have to attend japa and meditation and study at stated hours regularly without exception. Do you hear me?" Oh, Swamiji's tongue. He could make up words of abuse on the spot that no one had ever heard before. And once released, the words gushed forth in a torrential flow without knowing any end. He went on speaking or shouting or furious like this for some time. Sashi stood with his head bent down, listening to it all in patience, and then, when it finally subsided, calmly left without a word. He took some of my duties. Days passed. One day, Swamiji called Swami Ramakrishnananda to him. Sashi, I gave my word to the friends in Madras that I would very soon send one of my brother disciples. I've chosen you. You are to go to Madras and found a monastery in the name of our beloved master. Sashi Maharaj pleaded no excuse. For 12 long years, he kept constant vigil before the relics of Ramakrishna. It was an unbroken spell of ceaseless service, not visiting a single place during that crucial period of more than a decade, because he would not leave the shrine of his guru, whom he devotedly worshipped as a living presence. What a living faith in the guru he had. Beyond this, he knew nothing. Yet, he greeted this request as a command from Ramakrishna and prepared immediately to start for Madras. This is a description of a man of steady wisdom. To hold to something so steadfastly and be able to let it go like that, it's amazing. He made no distinction between the call of Vivekananda and the call of Ramakrishna. Thus, he could give his wholehearted allegiance and unhesitating obedience to this request. So he concludes, Virajananda concludes, many a sweet reminiscence has left its ineffable impress on the pages of my mind. His remembrances of Swami Ramakrishnananda. These memories are still green and fragrant in my memory, but they are too personal. It is better that they remain unexpressed, for their deep significance is beyond the power of words to express. They are my priceless inheritance. How profoundly our revered Swami, Sashi Maharaj, has molded my life and fashioned my personality can never be told in language. But for his affectionate love and unstinting help at the cradle of my spiritual life in early monastic days, I would not have become what I am. Who knows to what direction the tide of my life might have turned had he not been there behind me. Swami Brahmananda. So he went to Madras. And later, after things got fairly well established in Madras, Swami Brahmananda said that if a novice monk stayed in Madras with Swami Ramakrishnananda for 3 years, his monastic character would be formed. From that foundation on, his subsequent life of service and spiritual attainment could flower. Swami Ramakrishnananda did not give the kind of training that Swami Virajananda described to those he felt could not benefit from it. But those who did receive it became great second-generation Swamis of our order. And they felt like Virajananda an unspeakable benefit for having received it. So, we've arrived at Madras. Okay. Chennai also. So, Madras was a tough assignment for Swami Ramakrishnananda. He knew English, Bengali, and Sanskrit, but not Tamil. And although he could speak to the educated class in English, he was virtually cut off from the masses who spoke Tamil and still had that deep faith in the practice of the traditional Hinduism that enveloped them. The English medium educated imbibed a skepticism that made it almost like working with Westerners. And on the other hand, the Swami could speak and have conversations in Sanskrit with the Orthodox pundits who did not know English, but they had a kind of narrowness that acknowledged the efficacy of only the particular sect that they knew about. So, on the one hand, speaking to the English educated who were skeptical about the existence of God and their own rich spiritual heritage and had to be convinced and trained and dealt with on an intellectual level. And on the other hand, dealing with the Sanskrit pundits who had deep knowledge, but this incredible narrowness in trying to get both of them to widen out with the harmonizing and inspiring ideas of Sri Ramakrishna was a very tough task. And he wasn't really an orator. He wasn't a trained speaker. But he had an ability to get to the heart of difficult spiritual subjects and make them easily understood. And this made him a very captivating and effective speaker. But he was at his very best in casual conversation and discussion, and this is where we'll focus in these reminiscences. We'll start with the reminiscences of an anonymous Madras devotee that appeared in the Madras magazine VedantaSTL in 1967. It is now more than half a century since Swami Ramakrishnananda passed away from the earthly scene. For Swami Ramakrishnananda, everything he said, everything he did, even a casual remark, even a commonplace act, was full of the impress of a perfected character and charged with the aroma of disciplined culture. For him, there were no inspired moments. There were no dull minutes. His spiritual genius was ablaze all the time. I am one of those who have had a few exhilarating moments with the Swami, and those 6 decades have gone by. Every one of these experiences with him is fresh in memory and as enthralling now as it was when it happened. It was in 1906 that I first saw the Swami. I was a student in the 2nd FA class, and a retired postmaster who knew something of Ramakrishna and his movement told me by chance one day that a Swami would give a talk that evening at a nearby literary club. He was my neighbor, and we walked there at sunset. I was there when Swami VedantaSTL and Swami Ramakrishnananda walked in. I didn't hear Swami Ramakrishnananda then, I just saw him. Swami VedantaSTL was the guest, and he spoke. I had to be satisfied with a distant look and a close listening. 2 years later, I was at Madras at the end of 1908 to take my university exam. I came to know from a friend that the Ramakrishna monastery was nearby. I went there with him and he showed me the building. After a couple of days, on an afternoon, I made bold to enter the ochre-colored building, Swami Ramakrishnananda seated in the hall. With folded palms, I respectfully saluted him and sat down. Where do you come from? From Triplicane. And the very next question was, do you go to the temple of Parthasarathi there? Yes, I do go there now and then. He then added, with an emphasis which even now I feel, remember, now Parthasarathi is a form of Sri Krishna, Krishna the charioteer of Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita. Remember that Parthasarathi is no mere image. Great saints have had God's vision in the sanctum sanctorum of that temple. So what was he telling me? You know, in our temple literature, there's the deity, the river nearby, the trees of the locality, all these things. And last of all, the name of a worshiper who had God's vision there. Everything, Sashi Maharaj was saying, everything and that description is worthless unless someone had God realization in that spot. That is what makes it a holy shrine. Holy people make holy places. See, he had a knack for just honing in on what's important and doing it in a way so that you remember it for 60 years for the rest of your life. Next, Swami asked me if I was married. Yes, came my answer. People in these parts get married even at a tender age. Then he looked up and gave me the following pithy advice. Look upon your wife as God's daughter. Treat her with respect. Satisfy her wishes and make her happy in every way. This instruction entered my soul. I felt that it contained the quintessence of the Hindu householder ideal. Just as a human being's daughter cannot be anything other than a human being, or an animal's young one anything other than an animal, so, I thought, God's daughter cannot be anything other than God. And if one's wife is God, she becomes truly adorable. What higher destiny can there be for a wife than this position? And what grander ideal of householder's life can there be for a husband than the one given to me by Swami Ramakrishnananda? Its counterpart to the much more widely disseminated view that the wife should view her husband as God. But Sri Ramakrishna demonstrated in such an authoritative way this ideal that one should regard one's spouse as God. And he literally worshipped Sarada Devi as the Divine Mother and treated her as such. So this is casual conversation, you see, but there's always something going on that's really important. It was in the forenoon of another day that I heard Swami Ramakrishnananda telling a devotee he'd been feeling awfully thirsty for the previous few days. He did not know it, but it was a pre-symptom of a fever. And now, he said, the fever is on in full. Then in a tone which expressed humility, earnestness, and an utter dependence on God, and a childlike faith in Ramakrishna's grace, he said, "However wretched I may be, Sri Guru Maharaj, that is Ramakrishna, will not desert me." I quote his words, but it is not possible to convey anything of the intensity with which those words spontaneously came out of him and what a profound impression it made. He was just like a distressed child, resigning itself completely to the mother's care, with full faith in her power to save and cure. He won't desert me. He wasn't depending on the doctor or traditional medicine or his own knowledge of how the body works at all. When I start these talks, I always wonder how am I going to fill an hour, and by the time I'm done, it says, "Oh, how am I going to stop?" A certain young man who was very, a certain young man who was very fond of arguing about matters of faith became a frequent visitor. The patience with which Swami Ramakrishnananda would listen to the youth's immature logic and thinking was remarkable. But at the end of the discussion, the Swami would always, by means of a short remark or a pointed question, prick the bubble of the young man's cocksuredness and make him see things in their true perspective. That young man became one of Swami Ramakrishnananda's intimate devotees. One day this devotee reported to the Swami a certain uncharitable remark that was made by a casual visitor to the monastery. The visitor had looked around and said that he was surprised to see such luxury as a cot with a mattress in a monk's quarters, and said in a derisive tone, "Is this his austerity?" Now, the young man was very interested to get the response from Swami Ramakrishnananda, so he carried it to his ears, eager to see what would happen. The immediate reply was, "Tell him that Ramakrishna has done the austerity for all of us, and we need not do anything." Ooh. He spoke in the manner of a son, heir to the enormous wealth of his father. His deep sense of spiritual sufficiency and just being the disciple of Sri Ramakrishna was very evident in his voice and manner. The way in which he felt and spoke about the blessedness of being a close disciple, the inner circle of such a spiritual teacher, revealed him in a new angle to the reporting youth. Now, the second time I read that, I realized this is our anonymous devotee, the wrong-headed young man who came to argue and became the intimate devotee. And often the people that give the most trouble end up being the most devoted because they're serious. And evidently, Swami Ramakrishnananda could see this and was willing to have the patience to let it play out. Another day, the Swami called out to one of his juniors, all of a sudden, and said, "We must remove the thorns from the monastery pathway, the path that leads to the month." Immediately, and with great energy, he held a small towel that he kept as a collecting basin for the thorns. And as the thorns were being picked up from the path, he confided to this young man who was helping him, And the young man was at a loss to know why they were doing this all of a sudden at this time of day with such urgency, and that Swami Ramakrishnananda, who by that time was the great Ramakrishnananda of South India, was standing there collecting the thorns. So he confided. He just had a vision of Sri Ramakrishna strolling along the path and had seen that the master's feet were being pricked and bleeding by these thorns. This is why he had launched out so suddenly, with such energy, to clear the path. The disciple understood that to the Swami there were more things in heaven than earth than dreamt of by ordinary folk. The fact that he was so humanly accessible hid the fact that at the same time there was an aloofness, a distance, an atmosphere which was not of this world that hung around him, which was a suggestiveness of the sublime regions to which he had easy and free access every now and then. So the mystic world was part of his normal life. It's just that the rest of them could feel it but not see it. There's another story. He once visited a temple in Trivandrum, the Swami did, and there were others with him. As he was about to enter the sanctum sanctorum, a priest barred his way and said, "Are you a Brahmin?" Of course, he was a Brahmin by birth. In reply, the Swami intoned in Sanskrit, "No man am I, no god, no demigod. Neither am I Brahmin, nor Kshatriya, nor Vaishya, nor Sudra. Of no caste am I, nor brahmachari am I, nor householder am I, nor forest dweller am I, nor mendicant monk. I am the stuff of true illumination, the Atman, pure and free." The tone of his voice, which not the words, but the realization of that, and the way he intoned it, thrilled the people that were around him in the temple precincts, and they watched as the priest got out of his way. So, I want to talk a little bit about Sister Devamata, who was with Swami Ramakrishnananda for about a year and a half, sent there by her spiritual teacher, Swami Paramananda, and get just a little bit into her reminiscences. She was probably sent there for training, but her training was not anything like that of Swami Virajananda and the others. She had an entirely different kind of training. Whether Swami Ramakrishnananda spoke from the platform or in conversation, his message was always peculiarly his own. One day he admitted to me that his master had entrusted to him a certain special message to convey to the world, which he did not give even to Swami Vivekananda. Quote, "Swami Vivekananda was given the big, all-round message, but a small message was kept for me," he said. That he transmitted it faithfully and forcefully, none can doubt. Well, the title is Glimpses, so this is a glimpse. I recall one afternoon when he sat on my upper veranda. She lived in a rented house close to the monastery. He sat on my upper veranda for 4 hours talking to me of God and godly living, his face alight, his whole being seemed to glow with the exalted joy of his thought. Suddenly he rose, strode down the narrow brick stairway, and along the dusty road to the monastery gate. His step was so uplifted, his bearing so lofty, that as I watched him approach the gate, quite spontaneously and involuntarily, I felt surprise that he was not as tall as the monastery. He looked to me taller. When the Swami himself did puja in the monastery, he would call for his chadar, throw it around him with a wide gesture, and stride into the shrine, erect and stately as a sovereign. There was, however, no arrogance in his kingliness. It was the natural outcome of his lofty heritage. He was the disciple of a mighty master, the son of the great mother of the universe. Could there be a more royal tradition to shape life or bearing? He said to me more than once, "The Divine Mother does not like us to call ourselves her servants. We are children to her, not servants. Always think of yourself as her child." Where are we? Okay. The first time I read this book years ago, and I highly recommend it, Days in an Indian Monastery, I was impressed for some reason with this particular little gem. The Swami added, "The true devotee is so full of the thought of God that his own self is forgotten, her own self is forgotten. The body is only an instrument, a passive instrument, and an instrument really has no existence of its own. For that instrument is wholly dependent on the one who uses it. Suppose a pen were conscious. The pen would say, 'I have now written 100 letters.' But actually, the pen has done nothing, for the one who holds it has written the letters. So because we are conscious, we think we are doing these things, whereas, in reality, we are as much an instrument in the hands of that higher power as the pen is in our hands. And it is He that makes all things possible." You see, he had a gift for making it so simple. So, lastly, we're going to talk about Swami Ramakrishnananda's passing. He didn't pay much attention to his own health or well-being. During the last part of his stay in Madras, Swami Brahmananda and Holy Mother came, and this was the acme of his work there. He thought, if their holy feet can just touch the soil of South India, this will be the biggest blessing that can happen to the work that I've started. So he started getting sick towards the end of Holy Mother's visit, but didn't pay any attention to it. And by the time she left and he started paying attention to it, he couldn't ignore it. It had become galloping tuberculosis and diabetes, and there was no cure for it. So at Swami Brahmananda's command, he went back up to Calcutta, and again, they couldn't do anything for it. When he was in this terrible condition, dying, wasn't eating, wasn't sleeping, had a burning sensation all over his body. There were attendants that were taking care of him, amongst them Swami Abhayananda. Sometimes he'd forget his suffering and would talk about Ramakrishna for a long time. When the attendant would ask him to keep quiet, more nicely than that, the Swami would reply, "When I talk about the Master, I lose body consciousness, and even the pain of death becomes insignificant." In his last days, he became inspired when he talked of Christ. And he would relate how Sri Ramakrishna had told him that he had been Christ's companion in a previous life. Even in delirium, he only chanted God's name. As he was approaching the end, he wanted to see Holy Mother, who was then at Jairambati, and she couldn't come. First, there was no place to stay because he was at a boarding house, and there was just no place for her to stay there. But on the last night of his life, she appeared to him, and he said, "Ah, Mother has come." And then the next morning, which was the last morning of his life, a famous singer and devotee came to see him, and he narrated that vision to him and said, "Go to Girish Chandra Ghosh, tell him the vision, give him the first line, and tell him to write a song," which he did. And Girish Ghosh said, "By the Master's grace, I was able to sit down and compose it immediately." Then the singer came back with the song and sang it several times for Swami Ramakrishnananda. And it evidently tallied with the vision, so it was perfect. The first line, the night of misery is over. The terrible nightmare of I and mine is gone forever. The illusion of life and death no more. The sun of knowledge is dawning, and the Divine Mother is smiling. The Mother is bestowing the boon of fearlessness. Sing her victory in a loud voice. Proclaim the conquest of death by blowing the trumpet. Let the name of the Mother vibrate all over the world. Mother says, weep no more. Look at the feet of Ramakrishna. Son, look beside me. He is standing with his eyes, beaming with grace and compassion. For the last 3 hours, Swami Ramakrishnananda was in a semi-conscious state, and in some descriptions, actually samadhi. Just before 1 o'clock in the afternoon, his pulse showed signs of cessation. At 1 o'clock, his face became ruddy. His whole body seemed to emit extraordinary effulgence. The hair of his body stood on end. His face assumed such a reddish hue that it seemed as if the blood from the whole body moved towards his head. A bit of perspiration then appeared on his body. Even the hair on his head stood on end. Sri Ramakrishna entered Mahasamadhi with his eyes fixed at the center of his forehead, upwards, on Monday, August 21st, 1911, at 1:10 p.m. Surrounding him, his brother disciples chanted the name of Sri Ramakrishna. Even long after physical death, signs of horripilation were visible on his body. That means his hair continued to stand on end with that final ecstasy. Sister Devamata wrote, what St. Paul declared in his epistle to the Galatians, "Yet not I, but Christ liveth in me," perfectly described Swami Ramakrishnananda's attitude towards himself and towards the one he called Guru. He was dead wholly to himself and alive only in Sri Ramakrishna. So, Purnamada Purnamidham Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva vashishyate. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. So, we got word yesterday that Swami Chaitananda had changed his ticket. He was supposed to come back yesterday evening to St. Louis, but he wasn't feeling well as he was about to start for the airport, and rescheduled to come back on Monday evening. So we won't have a Zoom question and answer class following the lecture because Swami's not here to do it. But there will be a discussion, informal discussion in the library. And next week, Swami will speak, Swami Chaitananda will speak on the significance of Ramakrishna's words, which is a good follow-up for the discussion that we had of Swami Ramakrishnananda. And the classes Tuesday and Thursday evening at 8 o'clock are once again being conducted by Swami Shivachanananda. Tuesday evening is on the Narada Bhakti Sutras, and Thursday evening is about Sri Sarada Devi.